Introduction to ISO 27018 framework. ISO 27001 only goes so far to deal with the additional concerns associated with the processing of personal data using cloud computing. ISO created a new standard, the ISO IEC 27018 in 2014. CSPs, cloud service providers, are adopting this standard to help reassure their customers about the security of their data. An extension to ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. The ISO 2718 guides organizations concerned about how their cloud providers are handling personal identifiable information PII. It's a bit of legal aspect for organizations and one of the reasons that the EU GDPR took so long to agree. However, some definitions needed to be established first. Key among them is PII itself. This is the definition on which all discussions hang. PII has been defined as any information that can be used to identify the PII principle to whom such information relates or might be directly or indirectly linked to a PII principle. What ISO 27018 contains? There are several objectives within the standard. As per ISO, this includes to help the public cloud service provider comply with applicable obligations when acting as a PII processor, whether such obligations fall on the PII processor directly or through a contract. To enable the public cloud PII processor to be transparent in relevant matters so that cloud service customers can select well-governed cloud-based PII processing services. To assist the cloud service customer and the public cloud PII processor in entering into a contractual agreement to provide cloud service customers with a mechanism for exercising audit and compliance rights and responsibilities. While these are the bare principles, if we look at the ramifications of what this means and how they can help customers, then we can see that for the first time, there's a real framework for handling personal data in public cloud services. 2718 takes the extensive set of security controls described in ISO 27002 as a base and then extends them into two ways. First, existing security controls are extended in a number of areas to deal with dividing responsibilities between the cloud service customer and cloud service provider. And second, a new set of security controls are added to reflect the privacy principles defined in ISO IEC 29100 Privacy Framework Standard. The examples of security controls include requirements for the encryption of PII in motion when stored and also on any removable physical media. The deletion of PII within a specified period once the data is no longer required. That PII is processed only for the purpose expressly stated in the cloud service agreement to cooperate in dealing with the rights of PII principle in inspecting and correcting their PII, something that is mandated by many regulations. ISO 27018 ensures that a cloud service provider has appropriate procedures in place for handling PII. It can also assist in drawing up stronger cloud service agreements. The standard sets out how CSPs can train staff about PII, what documentation procedures are required, and sets guidelines on what to be followed. While selecting controls in 27018, pay attention to there are three areas where an organization needs to pay particular attention when implementing the standard. Are there existing legal and statutory requirements that an organization must follow, including any industry-specific rules and regulations? Does adherence to ISO IEC 27018 entails additional risks to the organization? While the adoption of the standard requires changes to the organization's corporate policies and business culture. Remember, you hold data on behalf of your customer. The customer has legal responsibility for what happens to its data. Let's rewind and know what ISO 27000 speaks about. From an international perspective, ISO has developed a family of standards for information security which provides a framework for organizations to develop processes and procedures to address information security concerns. The leading standard, ISO 27001, most widely recognized standard for protecting sensitive information against unintentional distributions and unauthorized access. With its 114 controls, ISO 27001 and closely related ISO 27002 can mitigate the risks involved with the collection, storage, and dissemination of information. What ISO 27018 wants organizations to implement. ISO 27018 is a code of practice for protecting personally identifiable information in public cloud services. Cloud service providers who process personally identifiable information, PII, under contract to their customers need to operate their services in ways that allow both parties to meet the requirements of applicable legislations and regulations covering the protection of PII. What terms are of useful? Cloud privacy, information privacy or data privacy, or rather data protection, is the relationship between the collection and dissemination of data, technology, public expectations of privacy, and the legal and contractual obligation surrounding them. Cloud security. Cloud computing security is the set of controls based on technologies and policies designed to adhere to regulatory compliance rules and protect the information, data applications, and infrastructure associated with cloud computing use. Cloud service customer, the user of the cloud services. Cloud service provider, a service provider that offers customer storage or software services available via a private cloud or a public network cloud. PII information, any information that, number one, can be used to establish a link between the information and the natural person to whom such information relates, and number two, is or can be directly or indirectly linked to a natural person. PII controller, privacy stakeholder that determines the purpose and means for processing personally identifiable information, PII, other than natural persons who use data for personal purposes. PII principle, natural person to whom the personally identifiable information relates. Remember this. PII processor. Privacy stakeholder that processes personally identifiable information on behalf of and under the instructions of a PII controller. Let's explore some of the risks related to privacy. In addition to the information security risks that have been computed and recorded, here are some of the risks that may be of interest. Risk of non-compliances, risk of data breach, contractual risk, risk to data subject, merger and acquisition risk, privacy notice risk, and reputational risk. The standard in a nutshell. The structure is similar to ISO 27002. Additional controls and associated implementation guidance applicable to PII protection for cloud computing service providers are described in Annexure A. In cases where controls need additional guidance applicable to PII protection for cloud computing service providers, this is given under the heading Public Cloud PII Protection Implementation Guidance. In some cases, further relevant information that enhances the additional guidance is provided under the heading Other Information for Public Cloud PII Protection. What controls are expected to be implemented and objectives? As said earlier, the ISO 27018 structure is based upon ISO 27002 controls and objectives. Herewith, we list out the control domains where specific requirements are set forth to be implemented in order to claim the ISO 27018 compliant organization. So there are 14 supplement controls and 25 extended controls. A5 Information security policies. The requirement under 2718 says privacy use and destruction policy, privacy policy statement, responsibility of public cloud PII processor, subcontractor and cloud service customer, list of PII or sensitive information considered based on organization, employees and customer, list of PII regulations that are applicable, and independent privacy audit report. A6 Organization of Information Security. The requirement under 2718 includes data privacy officer to be appointed or nominated, communication of the data privacy officer in cloud service agreement. A7 Human resource. Requirement includes awareness to all people on PII, privacy risk, impacts, compliances, and the consequences of non-compliances. A9 Access controls. Dormant accounts are reviewed at documented periodicity who have accesses to PII information. Secure logon procedures to be established and followed for the accesses provided to its cloud service customers, users as well. A10 Cryptography. Information on what cryptographic controls are implemented or can be selected by the end users are to be communicated to cloud service customer. A11 Physical and environmental security. List of media containing any PII information shall be identified and documented. While disposal, PII information will be securely erased and the same will be certified by the data privacy officer. PII information disposal records will be maintained and reviewed regularly. A12 Operations security. Proper risk assessments are done when PII information is used in test or development area. Adequate CISOs or DPOs approval and adequate risk assessments are carried out prior making use of the production data for testing. List of PII information that will be backed up on what all devices and where it will be maintained and what will be the retention period and the disposal method to be used upon retention period completion. Cloud service data backup restoration capabilities shall be covered in cloud service agreement. Backup and recovery process is tested regularly and documented. Where any backup and restoration related activities are outsourced, appropriate contracts are entered between PII processor and subcontractor, and the same is communicated to the cloud service customer. The log review process is documented. Log are reviewed and periodicity is documented. Logs enabled tracks actions, namely addition, deletion, modification, and details made on PII. Criteria will be defined and communicated to cloud service customer on log event identification, management, retention, disposal, use, mode, and frequency via how logs will be made available. The log review process is defined with roles and responsibility. Access made to the logs will be reviewed at a defined period. Log retention, rotation, and removal is documented and maintained as well as communicated to cloud service customer. A13 Communications Security. Details of information transfer are recorded and updated. Information or media in transit will be protected from any media tampering, and controls would be implemented such as tamper-proof tapes, encryption for soft information, and such similar one. A16 Information Security Incident Management. Sound incident management, handling, reporting, and escalations are documented and followed. A consistent incident handling process is in place. Incident management process is sound enough to detect any signs of PII related data breaches. A18 Compliance. Where presently independent audits are not feasible at public cloud PII processor place, it communicates to the cloud service customer on implemented security compliances level assurance, will elect an appropriate independent auditor to conduct an audit on assurance compliances of implemented policies, procedures, and security controls. So, are there any additional requirements to be implemented in addition to the above 14 numbers of supplemented controls? There are a handful of additional sets specified under Annexure A, starting from A2 till A12, which consists of 25 numbers of additional privacy requirements to be fulfilled. Let's see those one by one. A2 Consent and Choice. A21 Obligations to cooperate regarding PII principles right. Requirement includes the public cloud PII processor should provide the cloud service customer with the means to enable them to fulfill their obligations to facilitate the exercise of PII principles, rights to access, correct and or erase PII pertaining to them. A3 Purpose, legitimacy and specification. A31 Public cloud PII processor's purpose. PII to be processed under the contract should not be processed for any purpose independent of the instructions of the cloud service customer. A32 Public cloud PII processors commercial use. PII processed under a contract should not be used by the public cloud PII processor for the purpose of marketing and advertising without express consent. Such consent should not be a condition of receiving the service. A5 Data minimization. A51 Secure erasure of temporary files. Temporary files and documents be erased or destroyed within a specified period, and such periods are documented. A6 Use, retention and disclosure limitation. A61 PII disclosure notification. The contract between the public cloud PII processor and the cloud service customer should review the public cloud PII processor to notify the cloud service customer in accordance with any procedures and time periods agreed in the contract of any legally binding request for disclosure of PII by a law enforcement authority unless such a disclosure is otherwise prohibited. A62 Recording of PII disclosures. Disclosures of PII to third parties should be recorded, including what PII has been disclosed to whom and at what time. A8 Openness, transparency and notice. A81 Disclosure of subcontracted PII processing. The use of subcontractors by the public cloud PII processor to process PII should be disclosed to the relevant cloud service customers before their use. A10 Accountability. A10.1 Notification of a data breach involving PII. The public cloud PII processor should promptly notify the relevant cloud service customer in the event of any unauthorized access to PII or unauthorized access to the processing equipment or even facilities, resulting in loss, disclosure or alteration of PII. A10.2 Retention period for administrative security policies and guidelines. Copies of security policies and operating procedures should be retained for a specified documented period upon replacement, including the updation part. A10.3 PII return, transfer and disposal. The public cloud PII processor should have a policy in respect of the return, transfer and disposal of PII and should make this policy available to the cloud service customer. A11 Information security. A11.1 Confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements. Individuals under the public cloud PII processors control with access to PII should be subject to a confidentiality obligation. A11.2 Restrictions of the creation of hard copy material. The creation of hard copy material displaying PII should be restricted. A11.3 Control and logging of data restoration. There should be a procedure for and a log of data restoration efforts. A11.4 Protecting data on storage media leaving the premises. PII on media leaving the organization's premises should be subject to an authorization procedure and should not be accessible to anyone other than authorized personnel. Controls may be implemented such as encrypting the data that are concerned. A11.5 Use of unencrypted portable storage media and devices. Portable physical media and portable devices that do not permit encryption should not be used except where it is unavoidable, and any use of such portable media and devices should be documented. A11.6 Encryption of PII transmitted over public data transmission networks. PII that is transmitted over public data transmission networks should be encrypted prior to transmission. A11.7 Secure disposal of hard copy materials. Where hard copy materials are destroyed, they should be destroyed using mechanisms such as cross-cutting, shredding, incinerating, pulling, and such similar ones. A11.8 Unique use of user IDs. If more than one individual has access to stored PII, then they should each have a distinct user ID for identification, authentication, and authorization processes and purposes. A11.9 Records of authorized users. An up-to-date record of the users or profiles of users who have authorized access to the information system should be maintained. A11.10 User ID management. Deactivated or expired user IDs should not be granted to other individuals. A11.11 Contract measures. Contracts between cloud service customers and the public cloud PII processors should specify minimum technical and organizational measures to ensure that the contracted security arrangements are in place and that data are not processed for any purpose independent of the instructions of the controller. Such measures should not be subject to unilateral reduction by the public cloud PII processor. A11.12 Subcontracted PII processing. A11.12 Subcontracted PII processing. Contracts between the public cloud PII processor and any subcontractors that process PII should specify minimum technical and organizational measures that meet the information. A11.13 Access to data on pre-used data storage spaces. The public cloud PII processor should ensure that whenever data storage space is assigned to a cloud service customer or any data previously residing on that storage space is not visible to that cloud service customer or even to other customers. A12 Privacy compliance. A12.1 Geographical location of PII. The public cloud PII processor should specify and document the countries in which PII might possibly be stored. A12.2 Intended destination of PII. PII transmitted using a data transmission network should be subject to appropriate controls designed to ensure that data reaches its intended destination. So this was about ISO IEC 27018 privacy requirements for a public cloud PII processor, 14 supplemental controls and 25 extended controls.